Hi, everybody. I hope that you can hear me. Can you hear me? I've got the microphone in a weird place. Let's see. Let's start with a story. So, as I often do, I argue with people, often on Twitter. And one of the things was a completely non-initiated argument from myself, but that it was a response to Joe Biden that somebody else had made. And it was something to the effect of Joe Biden's tweet saying, I will use Twitter responsibly, or something along those lines. And then the person who responded had a very reasonable response. It was, well, I don't really care about Twitter right now. I'm very concerned about the fact that over 30 million Americans don't have health care. I'm more impacted by the fact that income and wealth inequality is skyrocketed, and actual everyday meaningful issues that affect people in the immediacy. And then everybody started jumping on this person, kind of like dogpiling her, saying like, oh, well, she's just a Bernie bro. And I just want everybody to be aware of what is going on when something like that takes place. When somebody comments, oh, they are just this. What they're actually saying is they are somebody in which we deride and look down upon. Do not take what they say seriously. So as opposed to addressing the actual concerns this person had, they basically deflected or attempted to. I actually called them out on this and got quite an unusual response. It was, oh, well, let me address these things, basically. While I don't agree with the fact that, this person addressed them the way that they did, I am happy to see some people with reason out there to be able to, I guess, see when they actually are straw manning, right? When they try to deflect from the actual issue as opposed to addressing the issue itself. So I just wanted, oh, can you not hear me? Oh, let's see if you guys can hear me now. All right, I have the microphone. I replaced it. Can you guys hear me now? Better? Lonely Flower Pot, howdy, back. And Majufi, hi there yourself. All right, awesome. So there's that. Also, I was just made aware only moments ago of another channel on this platform called Brain Snacks. She does videos very similar to the majority of the videos I have on this channel. And from what I've seen of it, it kind of looks really cool. And so I want you to, if you're interested in kind of brain behavior, things like that, you might want to go and give her channel a look-see, because it's exactly what we do here, essentially. So go check her out. Oh, James Kilgore said, I'm sub to Brain Snacks too. Awesome. So go check them out. Let's see. I'm just kind of like shooting the breeze, just because I know that people float in, and it takes a little bit of time to get everybody here that kind of wants to participate in this discussion, which is one on fascism and tyranny, which seems very relevant. Exceedingly relevant, actually. Okay, I think there's going to be a link in the chat if you guys want to check her at some point. The link will be available to you guys to look at. Can I go ahead and get started? Alrighty, so, well, what I should have done is looked up or given you a proper definition of tyranny and fascism. I'm not going to do that. I think most of us kind of get what that is at this point. In fact, not even just most of us, but all of us. Now we can have a debate, maybe, on what is these things. What is fascism? What does it actually look like? I see a lot of this debate surrounding you're a fascist, no, you're a fascist, no, you're a fascist, no, you're a fascist. And that's not very helpful. It's kind of helpful to be reminded, at least, what fascism actually looks like, right? And I think it would be, it's a good time to, I guess, do that reminder now. Okay, great. The link has been made available to you guys in the chat. Okay, Dan Edwards mentions that fascism is a very squishy thing, though, as even Eco's famous essay highlights. I think what you mean by squishy is that fascism is able to basically easily update itself to appeal to whatever population or time period it finds itself. So it kind of easily hijacks people's brain, if you will. And it does so based off of modern information and modern ideas. So in that regard, yes, fascism is quite malleable, maybe. But it more so it manipulates others as opposed to it necessarily being something an ephemeral. What's that word? I can't pronounce words very well right now. Instead of being a thing that is unable to be grasped, essentially. There are some commonalities here, and I think we can easily go over them. So let's start with Donald Trump. Why not? Recently, he made a tweet, whether it was yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday. I don't know. The news cycle is like this, and I can't keep up with when things happen anymore, it seems like. But he said with universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It'll be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people are properly and securely and safely can delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. Question. And I was very much more troubled by some of the responses I saw to this. I didn't write down verbatim what these responses were and who did these responses. I just kind of grabbed the overall sentiment of them. It was a response of, yes, do this. We trust your judgment. Yes, wait until 2024 to hold the next election. That way, everything is safe, which there's a problem here. And so what I would like to do today is understand where we are today regarding fascism. And I will also kind of, as I go through that understanding, I will also, define fascism based off of some kind of common themes and cores of fascism, so that you can understand where it fits. But first, to understand where we are as a nation regarding fascism, and I'm sorry, I'm using we as a very general term, and I apologize if you are abroad, but I know the United States the best because I am from that country, and so it is kind of my frame of reference. But I know that we're seeing kind of a rise of fascism, or just full-blown fascism, in a lot of different areas throughout the world. You can look at Turkey and Erdogan. and other similar circumstances. So to understand where we are in the US regarding fascism, I want to begin with a quote, and this quote comes from July 1852-ish, probably 1852, during an Independence Day celebration, a speech by American abolitionist and orator Frederick Douglass. Let me pull it up. Okay, so it's very interesting. He said, "This, for the purpose of the celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God." Then he goes on, "To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems where inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?" And so what he is referencing, if you didn't already catch that, is slavery, the institution of slavery, and the contradictions there with the independence of, or political independence in the United States, and the fact of owning other people who are not able to practice that independence themselves. In fact, actively not able to practice in the same things as other fellow countrymen. Okay. I'm actually stopped by a comment that I think that is a really poor example of the way to see the world. Jake Smith says, "Some people, when they look up at the stars, instead of seeing the light, they see Nazis." Who are those some people? I really am curious. Who do you know does that? Because this just sounds like an imaginary thing that someone else said exists because they want to diminish being called rightfully what they are themselves. It's a way to hijack your institutions and the ideas of others. It's a way to manipulate that. And we'll hopefully go into more detail as we move on through this, but I did want to address that. Okay, so let's move on to basically these tenets or common themes of fascism. You're more than welcome to look at, I guess there are things online that say like the 14 tenets of fascism. I kind of consolidated some of these into maybe one idea or concept, just because other books about fascism and things like that have, I think, more coherently talked about these 14 tenets and done so a little bit more concisely, while also basically adding their own ideas of what modern fascism is. So they updated it for the modern age. Again, that squishy nature of fascism, if you will. So one of these kind of core commonalities that I see, whether it's those 14 tenets or in the literature on fascism in and of itself, is this mythologizing of the past. So what this is that fascists will often go, "Man, do you remember this time?" Nobody can really grasp exactly what time period they're referring to, but it's kind of this kind of imaginary history that they are imagining happened or took place. I guess when Donald Trump, for example, uses the phrase or used the phrase in the 2016 campaign as his campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," that was doing the same thing that this mythologizing is doing, mythologizing the past. That was referring back to an age or an era of what Republicans believe is kind of the birth of modern day republicanism, which was in the 80s. They with Ronald Reagan, Reaganomics, and all of those things. This is kind of this ideal that they have, while also forgetting some very crucial things about that time period that actually took place, the facts on the ground. They conveniently forget those things. They forget, for instance, that Reagan had a very generous immigration policy, changed immigration policy to actually be more generous than it had prior. They forget this because now it's about fear and being afraid of other people. So there's this mythologizing of the past. There's also this idea, and this kind of feeds into other things, and there's overlap here as well. So don't think that these are just isolated, but that this idea of, I guess, post-World War II, where the woman was at home making babies, making food, preparing meals for the man who comes home after a decent day of work, and kicks off his shoes, picks up his newspaper, because everybody still reads newspapers, right? And says, "Honey, is dinner ready?" And then the wife goes, "Oh, in a minute." And then brings the dinner over to the table and all of those things. This idea of traditionalism, that's a myth too, because not everybody lived that way in the 50s, right? They just didn't. And again, it's forgetting the fact that there were people in the country living under Jim Crow during that time period. So why would you want to go back to something that restricted a sizable portion of the population's freedoms and rights? Unless that's what you aim to do, of course. So that's just something to be aware of. There's also a disdain for human rights. This is a very common theme in fascism. So, for instance, you might have a politician say something to the effect of, "Oh, terrorists. Okay, kill the terrorists, and while you're at it, kill their families," who have nothing to do with terrorist activities and terrorism, aren't terrorists. It's a violation of global law. No, it's a violation of norms. But I think it's also in the Geneva Convention that you do not attack family members of people in which you are actively engaged in, as far as war is concerned. Somebody may say something like that, and that's a clear violation of human rights, or disdain for them, for that matter. They may have a disdain for human rights in the fact that perhaps you have a nation that has decided that immigrants no longer have any rights, that they should be in cages, that their children should be stripped away from them, and their entire cultural history and understanding of who they are as human beings erased. You might have a nation that does that. For instance, there's a time period in which Native Americans were basically stripped of their heritage. And as kids were basically forced to go to school, Americans' education system, and they were not allowed to even use their original names. They were not allowed to speak their original tongue, and they had to learn English and all of those things. This is a form of genocide, by the way. There's various forms of genocide, and cultural erasure is one of them. So there's that disdain for human rights. And of course, if you are going to, conduct a genocide, you need to not believe that humans have rights, or that subhumans, people you consider to be subhumans, have no rights. So this one's a big one, and I'm going to talk in a lot about this one, I guess, more in depth. It's propaganda and media control, or control of the media. So as a good example of kind of this propaganda and how it works, think of 1984, the book, not the year, and the term doublespeak. This was where two opposing ideas are held at the same time. It doesn't make sense, but it somehow makes sense to the person who is kind of immersed in that propaganda. That's what propaganda is designed to do. It's designed to confuse and things like that. Sorry, something caught my eye. And I'll get to reading comments in a bit. So here's an example of doublespeak that I actually have seen and heard recently. Believing that it's safe for kids right now to physically go back to the classroom when a pandemic is raging. People are dying. Thousands of people are dying. But while at the same time saying that it's too dangerous for people to participate in their civic duties by voting, for instance, that is doublespeak. Those are two opposing ideas that people are right now hold in their head at the same time. It's nuts. I don't know how to describe it other than if you sat and thought about it for like a minute, for 60 seconds, you would hear how absurd these things are to even entertain in the first place. Another part of this is corruption and cronyism. So you might see the propaganda in which a politician, a fascist politician, is engaging in an anti-corruption campaign. Perhaps they'd say something like, drain the swamp. But they get into office and they themselves don't drain that swamp. They engage in such blatant, obvious corruption that it has boggled me for a while as to why this is acceptable, and as to why people, supporters of the current administration, for instance, don't see it, say they don't see it, pretend they don't see it. I couldn't understand it. But then, excuse me again. But then I was reading this and it clicked. So corruption here is seen as corruption of purity and not of law. So when they say we want to engage in an anti-corruption campaign by draining the swamp in Washington, it is not in the legal sense. It is about trying to basically assure that whatever their purity standards are met. And at the same time, it also carries with it an additional thing that I guess supporters themselves look at this, or how they look at this. So supporters are going to either overlook such obvious corruption or accept it, since they view it not as corruption as you and I may view it, but as a group of chosen people taking what belongs to them. So they believe that, for instance, Donald Trump pardoning Roger Stone, and him being released from prison after he literally confessed to doing the crimes in which he was convicted on. They believe that this is just fixing a wrong in the justice system in the United States. And there's a lot of fixes there, make no mistake. And one of those, we can have a conversation about sentencing lengths, right? And the amount of years people serve prison sentences. But it seems odd if you don't apply that standard across the board. If you only reserve that conversation and then forgiveness of crimes per se for your own friends, but for no one else. So, or just like a handful of other people, so there's plausible deniability. It's crazy. I try not to say crazy. Sorry, guys. Part of this even includes a diminishment or even straight up abolishing institutions that are designed to check power. A good instance as of late, I guess not really late, like as of the last 3 to 4 years, is the EPA. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the EPA has been stripped of so much of its funding and so much of its like legal capabilities that it can no longer function as a institution. It cannot check corporate power. It cannot assure that people are drinking safe drinking water, that a corporation isn't polluting streams. They are unable to do this because they do not have enough people. They do not have enough funds to support that effort. And it's handicapped them substantially. Part of this instance of propaganda includes a censorship of speech while saying it's freedom of speech. So I'll give an instance in a minute, but I thought this was a very interesting thing to keep in mind about this particular point is that propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, I'm sorry if I don't know how to pronounce names, basically said that this will remain one of the best jokes of democracy, that it gave its deadliest enemies the means by which it's destroyed. And so in order to have a democracy, people have to be able to practice speaking rights in order for everybody to be able to make an informed decision about policy. But this gets muddied, right? It gets muddied when somebody says, my views should take precedence over your views, or that my views are being limited with the intention to limit other views. What's an example of this one? So let's say freedom of speech on campus. So one of the things that you will see kind of right-wing people state is that freedom of speech is somehow restricted on campus, but it's not. And they'll also in turn say that students shouldn't participate in protests, which is an instance of freedom of speech. Specifically protests like Black Lives Matter protest, which was very recent. You will see these arguments made by the same exact people that state that that campuses and colleges should be a bastion of speaking rights. I think the Trump administration recently, maybe the beginning of this year, or was it 2 years ago, at some point during this administration, he signed an executive order saying that, campuses should remain bastions of free speech, something to that effect, as if they weren't already. I think it's ridiculous. Something else that I think people should keep in mind is that this idea that ideas from everybody are equally valid is just not true. It is not an equally valid position as to my my ideal of democracy, right, it is not equally valid to someone else's who prefers authoritarianism and tries to promote authoritarianism, because I believe that people should have equal rights. People under authoritarianism don't believe that. People under fascism don't believe that. And by under, I mean the people that promote it, not necessarily just the general people, because you can tell basically that people aren't necessarily in agreement with their government at all times. Another thing that you may see specifically under this category is the infusion of government with religion. And so this is designed basically as a tool of propaganda, once again, and it's using the major religion of whatever group is in that country, the major group in the country, that they'll use the major religion to manipulate people. So, for instance, recently, maybe last month, people came in Washington, D.C., gassed protesters along with church ministers in D.C. where basically they happened to be congregated together for a photo op. Donald Trump and his goons did that for a photo op of him holding the Bible upside down. And that not only had the effect of restricting people's freedom of movement and freedom of speech because they were actively protesting at the time, but it also was a way to manipulate opinion about protesters versus religion, as if that's what we're up against right now. It created a false dichotomy is what it did. Protesters are not against religion. The protests are not about religion. Somehow Donald Trump attempted to make it about this, as if it was a legitimate issue or a thing that was legitimately occurring, which was not. I don't think anybody fell for it, just by the fact that people just kind of laughed at it and just threw it away. I expect that there are many more instances. I just don't remember them just because of all the other shit that's happened. You'll see, I'm moving on. Hold on, let me review comments because I'm sure you guys have some thoughts. I agreed. James Kilgore makes a good point here. There's this idea, and I know that some people are going to disagree with me here and go on. You can say in the comments or in the chat that you disagree and tell me why. But the idea that these parties, like the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, are equivalent is untrue. And that I'm not sure if that's like creating a false dichotomy just because they're the only dichotomies that exist within the American political sphere as far as major parties are concerned, or the major parties of control. I am not a fan of either party, to be perfectly honest, and I see problems in both. I believe more problems exist with Republicans. I do believe that they are more toxic as far as politics is concerned. I do believe that this is a matter of degree. And so when we look at these things like Republicans versus Democrats, think of that degrees, that we can prefer one party over the other. We can explain why, but creating that equivalency makes it to where degrees no longer exist, where there's not a continuum. There is a continuum, and we should be able to recognize that. I do believe that the Democratic Party is mostly a right-wing party in the U.S., and there's a lot of evidence to support this. As far as if I have to vote for any right-wing party, you better believe it will not be the Republican Party. It will be most likely the Democratic Party. But that still does not take away my belief that both parties are right-wing. One is more right-wing than the other. That's all. That's all I have to say about that. Moving right along. Water. Last week I forgot my water, and by the end, my throat was just, it was awful. Okay. Another tenet of fascism is this kind of push towards anti-intellectualism. What I mean by that is this kind of disdain, if you will, towards institutions of learning, towards people that teach, towards educational systems. So, and with the idea here, it's kind of a contradictory stance for fascists too, because they have a disdain for this institution until it works for them, until it's used to what they believe it should be used for, which is to indoctrinate. They cannot envision an institution that doesn't indoctrinate. They cannot envision that. They do not understand that exists. They do not understand that as it exists today, most institutions in the United States, as far as higher learning is concerned, are not interested in giving opinions to students. They are not interested in that. What they are interested in is giving truth to students and allowing their own students to formulate their own opinions. For some reason, there is a contingent in this country that believe that they are indoctrinating people. And my guess is because they cannot envision an institution of learning that wouldn't be for that purpose, because that's how they use that themselves. So they want to, so anti-intellectualism is kind of not only a disdain for higher learning, it may be some just comments, it may just be vocabulary. So I think before Donald Trump was president, he said, "Oh, I love uneducated voters." Why would he love uneducated voters? Why is it that if you do an analysis of his vocabulary as it exists today, why does he have the vocabulary? Why is he using words that are no higher as far as grade level is concerned than the fourth grade? So he's dumbed down his speech for a reason, because this bypasses thinking. When you do so, it bypasses and often will go straight to your emotional centers, right? If it's not only dumbed down, but emotional. Maybe you build up a boogeyman. For instance, the boogeyman is the person who sees Nazis in the stars when everyone else sees light. That is a boogeyman, because that person does not exist. And again, it's a way to not talk about what Nazism is, what it looks like, who are Nazis. That's what it's designed to do. Kind of going in line with this, as far as anti-intellectualism is concerned, is a distortion or denial of reality. And I'm sure none of you guys are strangers of this at all. Fake news, the denial of reality that there is a pandemic that currently is going around. That does make people very ill. That can kill people. It's not something to scoff at. But when you want to not believe in intellectuals, when you want to basically, what's the right word here? Disregard, demean, minimize even intellectual thought, their research. You kind of apply that straight across the board. You don't necessarily make distinctions. You will not, well, fascists don't. Fascists won't decide to listen to someone like Dr. Fauci, who basically said, yeah, this is a problem. We should be wearing masks, and this thing will probably be around for the next 2 years. Do you think that this administration took any of that advice to heart? No. Do you think that this administration's supporters took any of that to heart? No. They're the dumbasses out here not wearing masks when they go to the grocery store. The thing about these masks that I probably don't have to remind you is that my mask protects you and your mask protects me. And we live in a society where the idea of society is to combine resources together in order to increase overall survivability. Some of those resources not only include physical resources like food, water, and clothing, shelter, it includes people's skill set. That includes their intellect, their area of expertise. I always butcher this. People, so I won't say the correct term for this. People who basically track viruses, outbreaks, predict them, they are being completely disregarded right now because there is a distortion of reality, and this distortion is basically an anti-intellectual one. So those kind of things are kind of working together to create a problem within society itself. The political problem of basically being unable to have an honest discussion or even debate about policy, because when there is no basis for truth. So we have no starting point. So if gravity exists, that is a truth. But right now, somebody of fascism says, well, gravity, that's like your opinion, man. It doesn't exist. They're trying to get people to deny a truth, objective reality. So if I want to say, well, because gravity exists, I would like to work on our infrastructure because gravity will cause bridges to collapse on people and property and things like that. A fascist politician says, well, since gravity doesn't exist, we can't even start there. And why are you, minimizing my opinion to promote yours? Because it's an opinion and not a fact. It's problematic. And I hope you guys recognize this as problematic. And when they do this, fascists replace reality with power. They make their opinion the truth. So again, it kind of harkens back to the comments I saw under Donald Trump's question, plausible deniability there of calling for a delaying of the elections, of we trust you, we trust your judgment, things like that. He is not an expert at this. He is not an expert at understanding what this disease does or has done or will do. He is not that. Yet people are deferring to him as if he is, as if that opinion matters when it shouldn't matter. I'm trying to read through comments. Theoretically, hi. Yeah. Judy Young mentions that the Democratic Party and Republican Party both serve their wealthy donors. Neither party serves the people. That's what makes the two parties the same. Yep. But they're not the same. There is a degree of difference. But I will agree with you. Both of them kind of appeal to donors over people. They will often legislate on behalf of donors over people, and that is a problem. And that's an argument is well reasoned here to advocate for getting money out of the political system or political process to move towards public funding of political campaigns as opposed to private funding of them, because that's a troubling problem that has arisen from basically money being free speech. Under this distortion of and denial of reality is the usage of conspiracy theories in order to substitute that reality. They may use, and I haven't heard this one explicitly stated by any politician in office. Maybe I have, actually. It's the Jewish conspiracy, where they believe, well, the Jews run the media, the banking system, basically run the world. And so I guess that matters, for one thing, and for two, it's not true. But it is a conspiracy theory, and people do think that that's true. But there is facts that suggest otherwise, that this is simply a conspiracy theory. And so what a fascist politician might do is say, well, the media is being biased by not reporting my opinion, my conspiracy theory. They get to claim that, and people fall for it. People do believe that the media has bias against things like conspiracy theories, and they should have something against them because they're not real, and they shouldn't be reporting on things that aren't real. And I think that in this day and age, it has created a problem because the media has been called out for so long about there being bias after bias after bias of conspiracy theories. And that's what they are, that they then started reporting them as if they were fact. And what does that do as far as informing people who then vote on policy in a democracy? It means that they're probably not going to vote within their own interest. They're going to vote definitely against their interest. And so that's another thing that happened and continues to happen. Here again, not all ideas are equally valid and should be covered at all. And this kind of like, now that I'm thinking of this, it's kind of this marketplace of ideas, right? You've heard that from the intellectual dark web, from people like Dave Rubin, for instance. If you don't know who these people are, you're very lucky. But they have promoted or proposed that, all ideas, all things that people say are valid within the marketplace of ideas. They could be if we lived in a utopian, where the utopian conception of consumers was real. But that does not exist. That is not the reality in which we live. And so the marketplace of ideas doesn't work and will promote bad ideas. Why should we ever have to basically say that someone else's idea is legitimate when their idea is Nazism, for instance? Why is that equally valid to somebody like Frederick Douglass, who was an abolitionist? That's his ideas and ideals he held was to emancipate all of the slaves in the United States. So why are those two equally valid ideas? I would argue that they aren't, but a fascist society would make them equivalent. Another thing that this happens to do is it just kind of appeals to people's emotions more than anything. You can't have rational debate when you're angry or when you're afraid. Unfortunately, these are the emotions that are most likely to result in some bad decision making. I have to keep saying this, that not all the time are these emotions illogical, because they could be completely logical per the situation. So, for instance, I see a snake and maybe I'm afraid of snakes. Regardless of if it's a poisonous snake or not, my instinct or my response to that fear is to run away. It's my flight, fight, or freeze response. And in that scenario, I ran. That would be a good decision, especially, and a logical one, considering that poisonous snakes absolutely exist. Perhaps in that scenario, it definitely was a poisonous snake. And so that response was 100% logical, if not necessary. But in other cases, especially when those boogeymans are proposed, right? The criminal immigrant, for instance, is a boogeyman, because they can't point towards an individual and tell me who they're referring to as the criminal immigrant, but they have conceived it into reality. They're in doing so are creating fear. People then have fear towards immigrants because all they're thinking now is criminal immigrant. They can't separate the two. And so that's an appeal towards raw emotion. Okay, so this kind of adds to kind of this idea or the discussion here. Supreme Scientist mentions that Goebbels, I'm sorry, I just can't pronounce names, said propaganda should be popular, not intellectually pleasing. Again, that's kind of the dumbing down of ideas that we see here. It should be able to reach a lot of people in a very understandable way, as opposed to be debated among a bunch of intellects. I honestly believe there's a balance, and I honestly believe that we could all be a bunch of intellects. For one, if we cared. For two, if we actually cared about education, and if we applied education in a positive sense across the board equally, which we do not do. Speaking of equally, there's another tenet of fascism here that is very common in all instances of fascism. I can't think of any instance in which this didn't take place or isn't a part of it, which is a strict hierarchy. So in thinking back to that bygone era of when women were subservient to men, right? That is a hierarchy. Believing that one single politician can come in and fix all the problems of the nation as a strong man, that gives into that hierarchy of somebody on top and then everybody following behind. In this, I do want to note, and this is actually a discussion in and of itself, but in this strict hierarchy is often, in fascism, is often a protection of corporations as part of this upper hierarchy idea. So the bigger the corporation, the more they'll likely be protected under fascist regimes. That's not to say that there's never been an intermingling between government and private companies, private corporations before, because there has, and we're all aware of that. I don't want to minimize that. But I think here, one of the things that makes fascism seem so squishy, that's what that person said, is because of the fact that it obliterates degree, that idea that the way in which something happens is, maybe it's bad, and we can all agree that thing's bad. Maybe another thing that's similar to that thing is worse and should be noted as such. But again, if we're raising both of these bad things as equally bad, we are unable to tell a difference. And that's not a good thing. We should be able to make a distinction there. I personally would like an egalitarian society, not a hierarchical one. And I think it's very poor of people to basically reason this by saying, well, hierarchies exist in nature, so therefore it makes sense that the human animal would be hierarchically structured. I think I mentioned this in last time, but not all things in nature are hierarchies. There are certainly some egalitarian social animals. There are matriarchal social animals if we talk about a hierarchy. I think orangutans are matriarchies mostly. Oh no, it's the bonobo. Bonobo is a matriarchy. So the way in which we structure our societies is not something that has to happen. We're human. We can structure them however we see fit. But people that benefit from a hierarchical structure will do everything in their power to continue to benefit from that structure, even if it means kind of inventing the idea that all instances of social animals in nature are hierarchically structured. I think Jordan Peterson, sorry if you don't know this guy's name or who he is, not even sorry, I'm envious of that. But Jordan Peterson basically justifies hierarchical society based off of lobsters, I think, and how they structured their society, forgetting that humans aren't lobsters. And I think people that fall for that argument kind of forget that too. So yeah, that's what I have about hierarchy. I honestly hate hierarchies. Capitalism, for instance, is a hierarchy. And it has to be, because it, in order to survive, needs people that will work and sell their labor in order to maintain it. And so that in and of itself already positions a hierarchy. It needs people to continue competing for jobs. So regardless of what society you have, as long as it is a capitalist-based one, that is their economic and social system, there will be a proportion of that population that has to be unemployed. That's just the reality of the situation. You need something else to assure that unemployment is a thing that doesn't exist. But capitalism will not assure that. It actually needs it. This one gets me. This part of fascism that just drives me insane. And it's an appeal to victimhood. It's a, well, I'm actually the real victim. You'll see this when, I don't remember the president. Maybe you guys can tell me who the president was. It was Andrew Johnson or Jackson, who during Reconstruction didn't sign the Civil Rights Act of the time into law, because he basically argued that, well, white people haven't had these protections, We're the real victims. So I cannot sign such a piece of legislation into law, because giving Black people these protections, the former slaves, the people that you owned, giving them these protections would basically, I don't know, strip white people of the same protections somehow. That's illogical, I know, but that's what he said. Lobster. Consider the humble lobster. I had to show that. Johnson. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you for that. I switched over to the chat because I was like, I knew somebody would know. All right. So when you have this appeal to victimhood, what does this mean about how people perceive the world around them? Does it, so if people think that they can so easily be victim or victimized, they are going to basically do everything they can to promote institutions that prevent that victimization, even if the victimization isn't actually real. Thus, you'll see something like a big supporting system of national security, of maybe even closing the borders. It's kind of to protect what's ours, so that these people who have victimized us forever don't continue to do so, don't continue to be able to get on the meager public assistance programs that we have in the United States. They should pay their own way. They're immigrants. It's utter nuts, actually. Kind of like going off of this, spinning off of this too, is a call for law and order. This will be a very, very common theme in fascism. Supremacy of the military in this regard. So think of like when Donald Trump, for instance, basically, he wasn't a politician at this time, but what were they? The five kids who were convicted of a crime they didn't commit. He basically called for their murder, for the state to give them the death penalty, even though they didn't commit the crime. And when reporters kind of asked, like people like Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump himself, like, do you regret calling for such a harsh punishment when these people didn't do the crime? They said no, not at all. That, in order to maintain law and order, we have to do such things like the death penalty, because that makes a lot of sense, for one. And two, it maintains law and order. It's a preventative measure, which is not. Remember, murder is a crime of passion, most likely. The majority of murders are. They are not planned out. Nobody is thinking straight when they do them. By nobody, I think a lot of people aren't. Not everybody. Yeah, the Central Park Five. Brad Bloom helped me out there. Central Park Five. And in Trump's response, when questioned if he regretted making that statement, Trump responded, Trump said they probably did something. And doing something is obviously warrants the death penalty. In fact, I think that there's a contradiction in the death penalty. Maybe you guys can let me know if you see this as a contradiction too. But in actually all forms of state-sanctioned violence, if they're using it as a deterrent measure, state-sanctioned violence, such as the death penalty, it kind of makes no sense, at least to me, that that just because they say what they do is legal, that it's morally acceptable. Does that make sense? I think people confuse morality with legality too much. Just because they say that somebody should die for a crime doesn't make that true. Doesn't mean that that's the punishment that they should have. It was not that long ago that the death penalty was applied because you were suspected of being a witch. And so, if we were wrong then, as far as killing people, we are probably wrong now. In fact, we are wrong as far as who committed the crime. We are not 100% sure in majority of cases that end up having the death penalty applied to them. Yet we carry this out on a legal sense, and then people are like, okay, because the state did it, I'm cool with it. Or there's no, I don't have to be conscientious about this because the state said so. And that just rubs me the wrong way. It bothers me a lot. It bothers me a lot. I don't know. I'm not going to read that because I don't know what that's in reference to. Okay. So wait. No. Nobody cared. I think that saying a blanket statement that nobody did something or everybody did something is not a good way to communicate information or what you mean. It's not a good way of making distinctions too. So by saying nobody cared about immigrants until Trump was elected, that's not true. I remember having discussions about immigration, at least under the Obama presidency, which I was legally of age to vote under. I remember holding those discussions often about how he has become the deporter in chief, and how he ended up, or how he was at the time, had deported more immigrants than any other president in history. I remember talking about this. I remember the camps that were created. It was reported, and people did care about it. Now, did it care to the point where anything was done about it? No. In fact, it's worsened. In fact, the things that have been done about it have been things to continue or like make it even more problematic than it was under the previous administration. So I think that that's a poor way to represent what was happening. Now, maybe you didn't know this. Maybe you yourself didn't care. And that's no judgment towards you. If you care now, that's what matters. But saying that nobody cared about Black Lives Matter, nobody cared about Black lives until 2 months ago is untrue as well. If you recall, do you recall the incidences of Ferguson? And do you recall that Black Lives Matter as an organization was created under the Obama administration? And so I don't think that is nobody. That sounds like somebody. So saying that nobody cared is bonkers. Maybe you didn't, and you care now. Again, if you care now, that's what matters. Yeah. So saying those things aren't true, right? So Jake Smith just admitted, yes, Amanda, I was marching under Obama and it felt like spitting in the wind. So it's not nobody. You're a somebody too. And if you were marching, you're somebody. Maybe it wasn't a whole lot of people, but it was somebody. And that's okay. Not great. It's not It doesn't make changes occur. In fact, the things that have happened as of recent, I don't see any real meaningful changes coming from it. I maybe in Missouri, maybe meaningful changes are coming. Maybe they do need to, abolish their police force. Again, maybe they do, and maybe that is the change that is needed. But as a nation, painting a mural of big letters of Black Lives Matter on a street didn't do much. Isn't meaningful. Is not affecting the lives and livelihoods of the people most affected, right? It didn't seem to have meaningful change on the whole, even as more people get involved. And that's the thing with civil rights. It expands. And rights that were restricted to a certain portion of the population get removed, and then they are afforded the rights. It's no longer restricted. And those campaigns aren't because people just woke up and decided, these people writing the laws woke up and decided, well, today, this right should be applied to this portion of the population and also this portion of the population. That is not how this has ever worked. All of the rights have come from people showing or demonstrating how much they need them through protests. Many protests did involve violence. People, again, forget that women's suffrage, there were many women who essentially committed terrorist attacks to gain the right to vote. And while no, those attacks weren't smart necessarily, it did get attention of that movement. And it was necessary. People forget the whole reason as to why we have 8-hour workdays. I mean, there was a massacre because of it. And so again, thank a unionist because they're the ones who ultimately had us at least get a day or two off from work, which I think is pitiful to begin with. But yeah, a call for law and order, that's where we were. The supremacy of the military kind of falls in with that. Stricter immigration laws and regulations fall into this. Speaking of the Obama administration, who did have these camps constructed, right? The concentration camps is what I consider them to be, because they are, where immigrants' time and labor is used for the behest and I guess benefit and gain for private companies and corporations. That's a fucking concentration camp. And so these things were constructed, temporary structures, might I add, because the intention was not to keep them up. Children were not separated from their parents. That wasn't a thing. And people, again, conflate the two. Just because Obama built some of the non-temporary camps, it's equivalent to Trump's immigration policy. That is not true. It is not equivalent. Obama did not separate. Obama did not indefinitely hold them in detention. There was a whole decision about this by the Supreme Court under the Obama administration, or some higher court, federal court, saying that immigrants could not be held past a certain time period, I think more than a month or something along those lines. That is gone under this administration. So keep that in mind, that there is a difference in degree. It's not saying that people prior have not set the stage for what's happening today. That's would be really, really ignorant of me to suggest that. In fact, I believe that so many times supposed left-wing politicians tend to buckle at the behest and pressure of the right wing's wants. And part of that was giving, I guess, the right wing part of the government a larger say in immigration policy than they probably should have had. Another theme under, or a kind of commonality in fascist regimes, is sexual politics. And again, this kind of goes towards that hierarchy, the thinking of the hierarchy, but it's also kind of the idea that not only are women subservient to men, other people who deviate from these traditional gender roles are somehow wrong, are need to be legislated. That marriage is between a man and a woman, legally speaking, right? That was a thing, which is, I don't even know where to begin with that one, because that is just, wow. For all this is another one of those double speaks, right? You've got the idea of limited government. Government shouldn't be intervening in how people live their lives. And yet, please legislate people's choice of partners. Legislate women's bodies so that they can't make the decision of their own, on their own, with their doctor to maybe have an abortion or even not have an abortion. That is somehow now legislated. And that's kind of part of that sexual politic. So in Nazi Germany, for instance, it was abortion during that time. It was illegal for Nazi women to get abortions, but it was legal for Jews and immigrants to get abortions. In fact, it was encouraged, if not done forcibly against that population. So that's kind of a contradictory stance in and of itself. And lastly, and I think not least, and kind of going into so many of these points, is an us versus them mentality, or creating scapegoats. So again, Jews rule the world. They're the reason why you aren't able to succeed financially. It's them. They're the ones setting your salary. They're the ones that rule the world. They're the ones that's controlling your politics. They control everything, right? That's creating an us versus them mentality. It's giving you a scapegoat so that all of your anger, all of your rage can go towards a population that had nothing to do with the problems that exist, that they had no control over. For instance, immigrants can't, as far as I know, they can't determine what a corporation or your boss pays you. Yet they get blamed for stagnant wages. They have no control over policy, over laws written on the books, or regulations put in place. Immigrants do not have that kind of power. It is legislatures and large corporations who have that power. And instead of people targeting them with whatever rage they have about stagnant wages, which is a legitimate rage to have, about unemployment, which is a legitimate rage to have, I think that people should have all of their needs met. And then if they want to work, because I don't believe that most jobs allow for people to be creative and to think and invent. I don't think that. I think that most jobs restrict that freedom. And if all people's needs were already met, we would have a flourishing society as far as creation and innovation is concerned, because you would have the people that now had the time to do these things. I just think that we should target the right people, not scapegoats. Target your boss, and by boss, I mean the large corporations. Maybe don't smack your boss in the face. I don't think that that would be good for your job outlook, and especially since we need jobs to survive, to basically meet our basic needs. And in the United States, you need a job, actually a decent job, to obtain healthcare, because healthcare is obtained through your employer instead of just given as a right. So that's a thing. So those are some commonalities that you'll see in every instance of fascism so far. There are some of that 14 instances or 14 tenets of fascism that I didn't even mention, just because I think that it was more applicable to mention these things and highlight these things that I've mentioned here. I think one I just avoided was election fraud. I think that, people can elicit that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, election fraud, we have to back up and define what fraud is. And people, again, don't agree on that. And so it's hard to find a truth there, right? Because people have muddied that. So I was reading this, sorry to just move on so quickly, but I was reading this thing about tyranny, about kind of what to look for, and also some recommendations as what to do as far as if your governments are turning tyrannical. And when I was reading through this book, I kind of made the determination that a lot of the ships sailed, that we are already living in a tyrannical government, just because everything that was identified as tyrannical applied to the United States for sure. So I kind of said, okay, well, I just want to focus on what to do if you happen to live under tyranny. I skipped some of these instances as far as what to do, because I felt like these were more relevant, or at least may have a larger impact. One of the recommendations that they had was to stand out, and not to be like stand out by, dressing like a clown, for instance, but stand out by being a voice, by basically not going with the herd. So if you feel that something is wrong, if it goes against every fiber of your being, all of the things you understand about your center of morality, do not follow the herd. Be the one person that stands out against that. It's a scary place to be, for sure, but do it. Basically speak up, do what you can to tell other people, and that things are wrong, that things need to change. Maybe you don't have the answers, and guess what? That's okay. People are smart. They recognize that not all the answers come from one individual, should come from one individual. Most people do, or did. Under fascism, not so much, because again, the figurehead, the strong man, is the authority and is the person that gets to make all decisions and has all the solutions ever. So stand out in that kind of regard. One thing that I tried to, I guess, promote really early on, even before this administration came into power, just because I didn't think it was appropriate, but don't adopt their language. So one of the language that they use to help move that Overton window, if you will, is this idea of social justice warrior, the idea of what is it? The fake outrage, maybe cancel culture. That's actually relatively new. Politically correct speech is an old one, and that helped kind of move that thing over, move the societal politics over to the right by adopting that, by even adopting maybe the idea of it, saying that people are being too politically correct is essentially meaningless, because what is politically correct? The fact that people don't want to be called bad names, is that what you're saying is something that's politically correct? Because as far as I'm concerned, that's just being courteous. That's just being a human being that lives among other human beings. We shouldn't call each other names, right? That's disrespectful. It's not politically correct in any way, shape, or form. What it also does by saying something like being against political correctness, it restricts your ability to discuss politics in and of itself, for fear of actually being said, that's not politically correct, or that is politically correct. It moves that needle over, and it does so too much. There was something that I wanted to mention as far as this language thing is concerned, and I don't remember the phrase but it's something I've been hearing a lot lately. Not the cancel culture thing. I recognize that's new. Cancel culture, FYI, doesn't exist. It's not a culture, first of all. Canceling is a thing that is done with an object, not a human being. You can say that this person shouldn't be a powerful person or a person of prominence because they promote hateful things, but that's not canceling either. Again, cancel culture is not a thing. And it's just this, and it all goes back to basically limiting people's ability to basically say, hey, this person is being a right old asshole. That's what it does. And it says that assholish behavior on the grounds that it's now political speech, because you calling me a bitch is political speech now. That is a legitimate form of speech, and they have a right to call you that, right? That's what this is doing. And the fact that people don't see through it is astounding to me. So don't adopt their language. We can convey messages to each other without going cancel culture, political correctness. I don't remember the other one. There was another one that is on the tip of my tongue, and I can't even remember it, but it's driving me crazy. Right. I just think that there was one. It's driving me nuts, guys. I get so stuck on some things about, and I just have to figure it out before I even move on. But that would be not very courteous of me to just pause everything and try to think about this for a long time. Maybe it'll come up, but we can convey things without adopting language of far right-wing extremists. Just saying, we can do that. We have that capacity. And also another thing you might want to try to do or remember is that truth does actually exist. It drives me crazy when we cannot say, hey, this is the truth, and what they're saying is bullshit. It's nonsensical that we are incapable of doing this. It is nonsensical when we all see these dog whistles, right? I tweeted out yesterday that American First, that phrase, is a callback to when there was a group, American First, named American First, designed to prevent American intervention in defeating Nazism. It was basically a pro-Nazi group, and they're calling back towards that. I see this. Why can I not tell you the truth and say, hey, they're using language of Nazis. They're probably fucking Nazis. Why can't I say this? Why can't I say, hey, so-and-so's are racist? Because they're racist. They are on the record as being racist. They're on the record of discriminating against people on the basis of their color, the color of their skin. That is racism. So committing a racism does not absolve you from being called a racist. It doesn't work that way. At least it shouldn't. But when things get muddied and saying, I'm not actually a racist, I just did that one racist thing, that muddies the understanding of what racism is. Why do we fall for these things? I want to know, why is it that we kind of just fall for it? I don't understand. Maybe someone else can enlighten me as to why it is we are so gullible in that sense. Now, I'm not sure if this is in relation to kind of what I'm discussing here, or what you guys are discussing in chat. And I recognize that it's overlap here, but I think there is a time to smell the roses and see the good things in life. I still believe most of the people I meet are good people. I think that that's generally true. I think people are good that you meet and that we all meet. There's a tiny minority of people that are terrible, that are actually racist. It doesn't mean that white supremacy isn't a thing. It doesn't mean that white privilege isn't a thing. But you are not being racist for having white privilege. That's not how that works. You are still a good person, even though you benefited from a society that structured itself on the basis of race, which is what it did. That's how it was structured in the first place. So you benefit from that system if you're white. That doesn't make you a bad person. Another thing, so truth exists. Recognize the truth. If a media article says something disparaging about a policy that the Trump administration has said or has enacted, like the removal of clean water standards, or the giving the right for mining companies to contaminate water with mercury, which is a mercury poisoning. It's not a good thing. They should be called out for it. It should be said that, yeah, that's a bad thing. They shouldn't do that. It shouldn't be said fake news. They just are saying that it's bad, I guess, because they don't like me. Well, they're saying it's bad because it's bad. Mercury poisoning is bad. Maybe that's why they're saying it. And so not all news is fake news. If it's on Fox, yeah, it's probably fake, but so here's a hard one. And I think it's going to be even harder for even younger generations than millennials. It'll definitely be hard for Gen Z and the generation to follow, but limit the use of tools against you. So say you're one of those people that are standing out. under fascism and tyranny, what happens is that if you are going against the establishment, you are often a target. And they will use the tools that they have available to blackmail you, embarrass you, to basically diminish your standing in a community based off of trivial things like something you said on the internet, or like maybe you sexted somebody. Is that how it's sexted? Right, sent a sexy picture to someone, and somehow they acquired it, and now they're blackmailing you so that it's not used against you. That is not to say that you shouldn't do things like what you should have the right to do. You should 100% be able to send a sexy picture to someone you like, period, end stop. There is no debate about that. The debate falls under the fact that people do gain power from doing horrible things, like using such a picture against you. And so that's just something to be cognizant about. You may want to have some sort of anonymity when it comes to your online behavior. Maybe you should use a VPN, and check your VPN company if you have one, if you use one, because not all of them are equitable. There are some VPN companies that do explicitly state that if a government entity did want the information from them, they would willingly provide it. There are some VPN companies that say the absolute opposite, that say they will not provide it unless a judge orders it. So just keep that in mind. If you use a VPN, make sure you check them out. Don't worry, it's not a plug for anything. This is the final thing that I felt was particularly relevant that you could consider as far as what's going on living under tyranny is the author said that modern tyranny is about terror management. So basically, a sudden disaster, like for instance, the outbreak of COVID, it never should call for the end of checks and balances on power. It should never call for a delay or end of people's basic rights, ever. And where it does, you are living under tyranny, but you also want to be cognizant of the fact that because it happens, because the government does it, for instance, that doesn't mean that it was right to do. Maybe it happened, maybe absolutely against your will. That doesn't mean you have to willingly go along with it after that. You can still say, hey, this happened and it's not right. There's still people saying these things today. The war in Iraq happened based off a lie. And even though we went along with it, it doesn't make it right. People should be held accountable for that. And the fact that people have either very short memories or don't really care about checks and balances on power is very telling for one thing and very depressing for another. But that still doesn't mean you have to go along with them either. You can say, hey, the war in Iraq wasn't okay, and the people responsible need to be held to account. You can still do that. The more times you're consistent on an idea such as that's based off of a conviction of yours, the more people you will get to come along with you for the ride. You just have to be, again, consistent over it. Brad Bloom, I think this is funny, says, if you don't send me alluring pictures, the fascists win. Exactly. You're right. You should do you and not let the fascists win by doing you, by behaving as yourself. Let's see. I'm done with my little talking things now. I'm sorry. I'm reading through comments now. I missed a lot. Okay, so this is kind of in regards to what we started out with. So I started with the text. Oh my God. I started out with the tweet from Donald Trump saying suspension of elections, question mark, question mark, question mark, because of the outbreak of COVID. Brad Bloom mentions that, especially seeing as how we live in an age where technology facilitates people remotely paying taxes, investing, earning degrees, etc. So many facets of living in this particular society you're able to do online, some of which is vital to maintain the society in and of itself, like paying taxes for one thing. Claiming we can't vote unless it's in person is ridiculous. Absolutely. And it doesn't make sense because they're willing to accept that what absentee ballots aren't fraudulent, right? But then saying that every other ballot that comes in the same manner in the same way is fraudulent. Like, does that make sense to anybody? Why is one set of things acceptable and the other not when it's the exact same process? It's the exact same thing. What is absentee ballots but not being able to be in person voting? That's exactly what an absentee ballot is. And to saying that there's a distinction between the two in and of itself is fascist. It's one of the tools of fascism. It's muddying the truth here. It's a propaganda technique, getting people to go against mail-in ballots. That's what it's doing. That's what it's designed to do. Because the more people that vote, the more likely the current power structure will not maintain power. The current administration will probably get thrown out on its ass if more people are in the voting process. So a lot of the time you'll see the right essentially restricting people's rights to vote in any way, shape, or form that they can. This is one of those restrictions. Theoretically, so is suspending civil rights in epidemic or war times okay or not okay? It's not okay, right? I think that was what I've been pretty much saying, that just because an epidemic occurs, just because a natural disaster or a sudden disaster of some kind occurs, that doesn't mean that it's okay to therefore say call for an end of checks and balances and to prevent people's rights from having rights. It's not okay. And it's not just okay, it should be not only a subset of the population saying this. It should be everybody. It should be all politicians saying that that tweet that Donald Trump sent about suspending elections was basically enough to remove him from the ballot, because that is what a dictator says and tries to do. Period. Every politician should be saying that in no way, shape, or form will we be doing this. And every politician should be saying we will have mail-in ballots, because we don't want people to get sick. We don't want them to die. They shouldn't have to make that sacrifice to either vote or potentially die, because that's the sacrifice that's being made here. If they force you to be in person during an epidemic that is known to kill people, right? Why should they give us that? That should not be the choice. In any civil society, that absolutely should not be the choice. And every politician should be saying this and shouting from the rooftops that this. And the fact that that they aren't is should tell you the health of your political system. It really should. And if you're me, you are alarmed. I swear, every day I'm alarmed by something new. And it's not something I didn't already know, but just reminding myself of the things, I'm like, okay, I'm alarmed about this again, you know. Lonely Flower Pot says, I think they actually do want us to die. I think that if it serves their purpose and to their end goal, yes. They don't care about life. That it's not a want to die, but that they don't care if it doesn't serve their purpose. So basically the whole response to COVID, right? If the goal is to be a dictator, you might take advantage of that disaster, not do anything about it, continue allowing people to get sick from it, to die from it. But it allows you, because people die, right, to suspend elections. A dictator would do that for sure. It serves their purpose. Now, if it didn't serve their purpose, like if it mattered to their election prospects as to if people died or not, they would probably try to prevent these deaths, prevent people from dying. I keep saying so many deaths at this point from COVID within the US were 100% avoidable. It's because people, again, denied truth and allowed politicians to do that for them, basically. Okay, so Ryan O'Donnell says, "Oh my God, I finally ran across you live streaming. I've been a fan of yours for a couple weeks now. Love your stuff. Love your stuff. Thank you, Ryan. I'm sorry I butchered your name. If you want to type in the chat screen as to how to pronounce it better, let me know." I recognize so many people here and I love it. I'm so glad you guys are having a conversation with each other. I think if you guys are like me, I have completely, as much as I can, socially isolated myself. I am vulnerable at getting sick from, well, I already had it once, but there is evidence right now, or not enough evidence at least, to suggest that you can't get it again. Because it seems like some people are getting it again, and I'm part of a vulnerable population that have poor outcomes if they contract it, probably especially if they contract it twice. So I have been avoiding everything. I haven't been doing gymnastics and I severely miss it. I haven't been meeting up with anybody. I haven't gone out to eat or any of those things because I recognize that this is a big deal, for one. And, I want to keep on living, I guess, for now. So, but my point is that I haven't had a lot of human interaction. So if you guys are like anything like me, where you can get it is great. And so I'm glad you are able to discuss these things with each other. I think it's important to continue to discuss politics, for one, what's going on in society for another, regardless of if you're isolated or not. Sion says, I've socially isolated myself as well for the most part. It's just smart to do. Just, you guys need to be careful. Okay, Brad Bloom, I'm going to be so angry with you if you don't stay in a hermetically sealed bubble. And I am the same as you in this regard. No activities, meeting people, etc. Yeah, it's lonely. It can be a very lonely thing to do. So, but it's safe. Alrighty. It's kind of weird for me to go, do you guys have any questions? I feel like I'm when I do those things, if I were to ask that it would be like a lecture, and that wasn't the intention for the discussion. It was to give you information and then to talk about it. So me going, do you have any questions? Seems really weird, but do you have any questions? Oh goodness. I'm so silly to myself. I'm the only one who laughs at myself. It's sad. Alrighty. I do thank you guys for joining me tonight. I have nearly been on this stream for almost 2 hours. It was a long topic though. Zion Gardner, I'm thankful for your insight. Well, you are very much welcome. Oh, Jake Smith. Amanda, I loved how you owned me. You beat me up pretty good. I don't think of it like that at all. It's more about making sure that people get the appropriate information. And sometimes the information we have isn't right. And it's nice when people say, hey, this isn't what's going on. Here's what I know from this. Don't forget it. That this perspective exists. That's all that's going on. Theoretically, great stream, great discussion. I think these are the clapping. Thanks for your activism. You are very welcome. Alrighty, guys. I hope you have a great weekend. And sorry, I keep going. I'm going to end, but I forgot to tell you guys this. So I said last week that the week after this one that I would have an official video and a guest kind of join me for a discussion after this video premiere. Unfortunately, the guest isn't able to do it that week because they're going to be on vacation. So we are aiming for the week after that one. So it's going to be delayed a little bit. So I will be doing another live stream next week. I will be also doing a live stream the week after, but with a premiere video that's kind of like the standard one on this channel, and also a discussion about that particular video. So just so that you guys know what's coming down the line or the pipeline. All right, guys, now I will exit. Bye.